Good morning. I am very excited to be here. I was trying to tweet y'all back, but I couldn't keep up. Welcome, and thank you for having me. I'm going to start with a story because that's what I do. So we're going to start here. This is Lake Travis in Austin. Yeah. Now I feel better. There are Texans among us. So this is Lake Travis in Austin, and this is a really special lake for me because I spent every summer of my childhood here with my great aunt, who was really one of the meanest women who've ever walked the face of the earth. But she and I had a special relationship. And so growing up, this was the special place. This was my place. It's where I learned how to fish. It's where I learned how to run a trot line. She was the Avon lady at the lake. And so I would run her route with her. I was in charge of the lipstick. So Steve and I decided a couple years ago, this is my family, Steve and I decided a couple years ago that we were going to pool all of our summer vacation and take 1 2-week summer vacation at Lake Travis. And this was a really big deal for us. So we're sitting there and we're having what we call in our house the CTJ, a come to Jesus meeting about this vacation. And Steve's like, I don't think we can just do a free-for-all for 2 weeks. Like, we're gonna have to have some rules. This is a very long, there's gotta be screen limits for the kids, there's gotta be bedtimes. I'm like, yes, and we have to be really healthy. He's like, what do you mean? I said, we have to have a healthy vacation. And he's like, okay. And I said, I'm gonna cook, we can grill, and we'll exercise every single day so that when we come back from the 2-week vacation, we're in better shape than when we left. Steve's like, all right. So we decided to swim this cove every single day together. Now, the thing to know about me and Steve is that we met coaching swimming 27 years ago. He still swims competitively in Masters Club, and I am a shame researcher. But I was up for it. So I buy a new Speedo, we're prepared, we tell our family, you can come visit anytime, we're gonna be at this lake house. It's just gonna be a healthy vacation, so make sure you bring groceries and you're welcome to come. So one morning we wake up and the kids are asleep, but my sisters are in town. So we leave the kids upstairs and we go down to the dock and we dive in and we start swimming across. And it is so beautiful. I cannot tell you how beautiful it is here. And we get halfway across and, open water swimming, you stop and you kind of look around and I look around and I see Steve, who's like 15 feet ahead of me, and he's looking around, and I catch his eye. And I'm so overwhelmed with the beauty of this moment that I stop and I look at him and I yell across the lake, I'm so grateful to be here with you. I feel so connected to you right now. And he looks back at me and he goes, yeah, water's good. And he keeps swimming. So honest to God, my first thought was, and this is super arrogant, but my first thought is, he's so overwhelmed with emotion for me that he doesn't know what to say back. Like, he's dumbfounded. And we're in water that's really deep, and he's probably just like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed, I just need to keep swimming. And I was like, that is so weird, because let me tell you, in our marriage, he's much more likely to say something like that to me than I am to say that to him. He's much braver with his emotion than I am. So we get to the other side, and now we're like 2 feet across from each other. And I'm thinking to myself, do I go in again? Do I reach back out to Steve? So I wish I could see you if I had a visor. So like, how many of you think I should go back in? I'm always curious. 10%. So it's really interesting because you're marketers, you should know this regionally. If I say rhetorically in a talk, if I'm telling this story and I say, should I go back in? And I'm on the East Coast, people are like this, no. I've only said it once, because I don't tell the story all the time because it's a very personal story, but if I said it in California, oh my God, what's wrong with you people? People literally in the audience went like this. Which is why I feel completely untethered in California. I'm like, what is happening out here? But I got my California on, wearing my cheers, and I decided to go in again. So I look at Steve, and I said, this is amazing, and I'm so glad we're committed to spending this time together. And he looked back at me, and he said, swim's good, thanks. And he keeps swimming. So now I'm pissed. And I am like, I'm swimming. I'm like, what is happening? Like, what is going on? Like, did I do something? What happened? And I know exactly how this story ends. How many men in here know how this story ends? Raise your hand if you're a guy in here and you're familiar with the term payback. Right. So this is how the story would end. We would get back to the dock. We'd dry off. We'd go upstairs to the kitchen. He'd look over at me and he'd say, hey, babe, what's for breakfast? And I'd say, I don't know, babe. That's nervous laughter. I don't know, babe. Let me ask the breakfast fairy. Oh, breakfast fairy? Breakfast fairy? What's for breakfast this morning? Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. I forgot how breakfast works on vacation. I'm in charge of breakfast and lunch and dinner and packing and laundry and sunscreen and goggles and unpacking and grocery shopping. I forgot how our vacation works. Yes or no? And the worst part about that is somewhere in the middle of that, this is exactly what Steve would look like. And then he would go, did something happen? But I am bound and determined for this not to happen because this is my magic lake. Don't jack with my lake. So we get back to the dock, and I've already played this story to the end, and I've already thought, you know what? He's been faking being nice for 25 years. He's really an asshole. That's what's happening right now. What's happening right now is this is the true Steve. Give him a physical challenge, wear him out a little bit, and this is him. 25 years of BS covered up. So we get back to the dock, and it's like 30 feet deep at the dock, so we're treading water, and he starts to pull himself out on the ladder, and I say, hey, can you get back in the water for a sec? So he lowers himself in the water, and he goes, what's up? And I said, I'm trying to reach out and connect with you, and you're blowing me off. And I don't understand what's happening. And he kind of turns away from me in the water and turns back, and he goes, shit, man, are you being vulnerable? And I was like, yeah, I am, but I'm right on the edge of rage. So he looks at me and he says, and I quote, I don't want to do this with you. And so I'm like, oh, this is where I'm gonna be when I find out we're getting a divorce. Here it comes. Here comes everything that I've been waiting, this is it. Why not? And so what do you mean? He goes, I just don't want to have this conversation with you right now. I'm like, oh, tough shit. Okay, I'm talking, you're listening, you're talking, I'm listening, ergo, we're in conversation. And he said, really, Brene, I don't want to do this with you. I don't want to have this conversation right now. Now, here's where I want you to take a deep breath. Really, collectively. Because I am out of tools at this point. And you should know this as collectively, given what you do for a living. What can be the emotional response when you push out a bid for connection with someone and they push you away and reject that bid? What is the emotion or affect that we experience? Mostly it's shame. Mostly it is, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, something's wrong with me. It's shame. So at this moment, I go into major shame. And so while it's gonna sound funny, I want you to know that it was a very, very painful moment for me. And I don't know how to connect with him. I don't know how to reach out to him. I don't know what to do. All I can grab onto in 30 feet of water is a sentence. that has emerged from my data, 150,000 pieces of data, a sentence that it's emerged over and over and over again, but I didn't even pay attention to until the last 3 years. It's the only thing I have. It's my little life raft in that moment. So I look at Steve and I say this sentence, and we're going to talk a lot about this sentence after the story. The story I'm making up right now is one of two things that's happening, Steve. And remember, I'm in a painful place. Either A, you looked over at me while we were swimming, and you have to remember this was the first time we've been in the water together for 20 years, besides like with our kids in the pool. You looked over at me and thought, geez, she's old. Like she's old. She is not that lifeguard swim team coach that I met 25 years ago and married. She's old. Or you looked over and thought, man, she does not rock the Speedo like she did 25 years and 2 kids ago. Because for women, what is the number one shame trigger still today? Appearance and body image. So Steve looks at me and says, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm trying to reach out with you. Reach out to you. You're blowing me off. You're like, swim's good, water's good, blah, blah, blah. What's going on? And he turns away and he turns back and he said, look, Brene, I don't mind taking care of the kids while we're on vacation. I know, especially when your sisters are here, you don't get to hang out with them all the time. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, I don't mind taking care of the kids. And my first response was, there has been a neurological event, which explains everything, including this conversation that I don't understand. And he says, I don't mind taking care of the kids. And I'm like, Steve, you're freaking me out. What is happening? And he said, you know how the kids love to go back and forth across the cove all day long because that's where the hidden treasure is? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I don't mind taking them. And I finally look at him and I'm like, dude, I don't know what's happening right now, but I'm freaking out. What is wrong with you? And he said, look, Brene, I don't know what you were saying to me this morning in the water. I didn't hear anything you said. I was just counting strokes, trying to fend off the worst panic attack of my life. And I was like, what? And he said, I don't know what you were saying to me this morning. I was having a total extreme panic attack this morning, so I was just counting my strokes. And competitive swimmers count strokes a lot. And it's not unusual for competitive swimmers to get into lakes and oceans and get overwhelmed because all of a sudden this environment that you can control, you can't control now. And so I'm like, I don't understand. He said, last night I had a dream that I had all 5 of the kids. We were halfway across the lake and a ski boat came. And I went like this, and I kept going like that, but the boat didn't slow down. So I grabbed all 5 of the kids, and I went as deep as I could, and I just stayed underwater and waited and waited and waited, because I knew if we surfaced, we'd immediately be killed if that boat hit us. And let me tell you, it's tough down there with 5 kids. Ellen and Lorna, pretty good swimmers. Amaya and Charlie, little. Gabby's 2. And he said, so in my dream, I stayed down there and waited. But at one moment, I looked over at Charlie, who's our son, who was 7 at the time. And I knew if I stayed down 2 more seconds, Charlie would drown. So I don't know what you were saying to me this morning while we were swimming. I was just counting strokes and trying to stay focused in the water. And it made total sense to me because the night before, we had arrived at Lake Travis on a Monday. This was our first weekend there. And the night before, we were lying in bed talking about, hey, let's not jet ski or tube or do anything this weekend. Let's just do other things right around the dock. We'll fish and stuff like that because it's Lake Travis on a Friday during the summer. Tons of drinking and boating. It's just, not a good idea. And so I could totally see how that happened. And he looks at me and I can tell he's in pain. And I look back at him and I say, I'm so glad you shared that with me. And he looks at me and he says, bullshit. And I was like, what? Because I thought my response was so right. Thank you for sharing that with me. And he's like, don't BS me about your research. Don't tell me what you've learned about men. I don't want to hear it. The truth is, you want the guy that when the boat comes can take all 5 of the kids, throw them across the lake to the other side where they're safe, swim so fast that he's there to catch them when they land, and then looks across the cove at you and says, don't worry, babe, I've got this. That's what you want. So here we are in this very perfect shame storm. I'm in my body image. I'm old. I haven't been swimming with my husband in 20 years. Number one shame trigger for women, appearance and body image. Number one shame trigger for men. Any guesses? I see someone mouthing it. Appearance of weakness. So he's in this shame shitstorm too. And here we are. You know, I always say, show me a woman who can sit with a man in real fear and vulnerability. And I'll show you a woman who's done her own work about vulnerability and doesn't derive her power or status from that guy. Show me a man who can sit with a woman in real fear and vulnerability, and I'll show you a guy who's done his own work around vulnerability and doesn't derive his power or status from being Oz, the almighty fixer of all things. And so I look at Steve and I tell the truth. I said, you know what? 10 years ago, if you would have told me this, I would have said the right thing. But one day later, or 2 days later, or maybe even 3 days later, when you looked at me and said, I'm gonna take the kids tubing, I may have looked back at you if I was scared and said, are you sure you're feeling up to it? How do y'all think that would have felt for Steve? How many of you have ever shared something vulnerable with someone only to have them use it against you? I file that under special place in hell. I told him 5 years ago, had you shared this with me, I think I would have said the right thing, and I know I would have felt it. But today, dude, we are all we have. We are all we have is each other. And the fact that you and I can have this conversation together after 25 years means something to me. I want to see you, and I want to be seen by you. I get it. And then there was this moment in our relationship where everything changed. And I can tell you from that moment, at that rusty ladder in the dock, at Lake Travis, things have not been the same. Because when we fight now, we go straight to, I mean, I screw it up on a regular basis, but I do. But we go straight to the story that we're making up. Because here's the thing, everybody's sitting in this room. Forget your your professional goals for a second. Personal goals, which I think they're inextricably connected, P.S. Everyone in here wants more love, more intimacy, more joy, more trust, more belonging. Vulnerability is the only path to those things. You know, 13 years of research, and here's what I can tell you. Vulnerability, how many of you were raised to believe that being vulnerable is being weak? Vulnerability is weakness. I'm literally a 5th-generation Texan. Family motto, lock and load. I'm not even kidding. We have it on cups. I talked to my dad last night when I landed at Logan. I was like, I'm here, just wanted to say, just check on you. How's Molly feeling, his wife? He's like, we're all good, sis. Lock and load in Boston, babe, lock and load. I'm like, okay, we gotta have a new motto. I was raised that way too, but we asked thousands of people, what is vulnerability? And here's what they told us. Vulnerability is the first date after my divorce, trying to get pregnant after my second miscarriage, saying I love you first in a relationship, sitting with my wife who has stage 4 breast cancer, making plans for our young kids, starting my own business. A great one that just is perfect for this group, sales, everything about it, from the time I get to work to the time I go to sleep, which is not really when I go to sleep because I'm still worrying about it. Vulnerability is about the willingness to show up and be seen when you have no control over the outcome. It's what y'all do every day. The willingness to show up and be seen. It is not weakness. It is, in fact, our greatest measure of courage. For me, putting ourselves out there in this world is very difficult because it is an unforgiving, very critical world. There was a moment in my life after the TED Talk went viral, which everyone assured me no one would ever watch. And I was, really happy. It was like 10 people, 30 people, then 1 million, 5 million. And there was a moment in time where I was on every news outlet, literally from Al Jazeera and the BBC to everywhere. Because who is this woman in Houston and what's her TED Talk about vulnerability? And I made the mistake, against the advice of my husband and my therapist, of going online and reading all these news stories and reading all the comments in these news stories. where if I asked you to close your eyes, everybody in here, and I don't want you to do it, and think of 2 or 3 things you could overhear someone saying about you that would be so painful you don't know if you could ever face that person again, we could all do it. Because we have 50, 60 years of data now that show us that we all know shame. The only people who don't know shame are people who have no capacity for connection or empathy. So everyone clear that we know shame? Your choices are, oh yeah, I know what shame is, or no, I'm a sociopath. Like, you know what shame is. I had those things. And I'm telling you the story for a really important, I think an important reason given what you do. I had those things, and it was not worth hearing them to me. I could not face them. So I engineered my career to be just small enough to be under the radar, which is hard because that is always accompanied by pissed offedness and resentment when you don't fully step into your power and do what you know you can do. But that morning, reading those comments was everything I was afraid of. Less research, more Botox. I feel sorry for her husband. She's a dumbass. They should repeal her PhD. Like, from an anonymous user with a Russell Crowe avatar. We can't all be as brave as you, douchebag. This is yes or no. Is this what you're thinking when you're reading this? Yes or no? And so I was just devastated. I was devastated. I really thought I made a mistake putting myself out in the world and showing up and being seen. This was a huge, I don't have what it takes to endure that. And I came across this quote that day after watching Downton Abbey for 8 hours from Theodore Roosevelt, and it changed my life. It's a quote that if you're in sales and marketing, you should really know this quote. It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done it differently. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust, sweat, blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again and again, and who in the end, while he may know the triumph of high achievement, when he fails, he does so at least daring greatly. And in that moment, I knew 3 things for sure. I'm gonna live a brave life. And the only guarantee of living a brave life is you will get your ass kicked. You will fail. You will fall. You will get hurt. You have the courage to love someone, you will have your heart broken. You have the courage to engage and really care about what you're doing, you will be disappointed. And if you have the courage to be innovative and brave with your work, you will absolutely fail. And it's so funny because I spend all my time now working with leaders from Pixar to West Point. And leaders always say, okay, I get it. I want to be brave and I'm willing to risk falling. I'm like, that is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you need to risk falling. I'm saying you will fall, like you're going down. There's just empirical evidence. I mean, if you're innovative enough, you try enough, you're engaged enough, you're gonna get hurt. So the choices that we all have to face every day, and we have to face it 20 times a day sometimes, are we willing to choose courage over comfort? Because there is nothing comfortable about being brave. If you think you're being brave and you're really comfortable, you are not being that brave. There is nothing comfortable about being courageous with our lives, personally or professionally. So after daring greatly, to me, the ethic was, I need to write about falling down. What does it mean to fall down? What does it mean if you reach out across a lake from someone and say, I love you and I'm mesmerized by this moment? That is not gonna work out every time for you. And you can play it safe. You can just keep your head in the water and never try it. But I'm not sure that that is fully living. And I'm not sure, given what you do for a living, that that will work at all. You have to show up and be seen. And I don't want you to show up and show me what you have. I may or may not give a shit about what you have. I will care about you. So I want to know you. I want to see you. I want to see what you think is important, what you think is relevant. That's what I want to see. I want to know you. And if you're not a part of the equation, I'm not going to be a part of the equation. Because we are not, this is the big mistake that I think we make. We believe that we are cognitive beings, thinking people who occasionally feel. We are not. We are feeling beings, emotional beings who on occasion think. Seriously. I could back truckloads of peer-reviewed journal articles from everyone from, applied science to Harvard Business Review, talking specifically about leadership, saying, you want to change people's behavior, you better speak to their emotion. And if you don't know how to do that, meaning you're not clear about how affect or emotion works, you're in trouble. So let's talk about what happens when we fall. A very simple physics of vulnerability. You're brave enough, often enough, you're going to go down. I went into this last research asking this question. Men and women who get back up on their feet after disappointment, heartbreak, failure, and do so with even more courage and more tenacity than they had before they fell, what do they share in common? And across every single interview, there was a process that these men and women shared in common. So let me share it with you. I'm going to go to this. I call the process the reckoning, the rumble, and the revolution. There's 3 pieces that these men and women had in common. Here's what I want to tell you about failure and about disappointment and about heartbreak that no one talks about. Even in all of the failure movements we see right now, which I'm a fan of. How many of you know the failure movements? Fail forward, fail often, fail fast. Those are important, and they're great, except when we don't sell the truth about what failure feels like. I have failed. I know what failure feels like. I have had a call from an editor where they said, do you want to buy some extra books? And I'm like, yeah, my mom would love some for her bridge group. No, we have like 4,000 because we're remaindering your book. Like we're composting your book. It's not selling. It's taking up too much real estate in the warehouse. We're actually pulping it. I know what failure feels like. I know what heartbreak feels like. Those things hurt, and they will take your breath away. So if you really want to create a culture where people are willing to risk and fail, you have to be honest about what it feels like. You have to stand in front of people and say, all right, team, our project failed. And let me tell you what that feels like for me. It feels like shit. I didn't want to come to work this morning, but I did. And on the way here, I tried to figure out who I could blame when I got here, whose fault it could be, who could we throw under the bus. And then I decided not to do that. Then I decided I was in the wrong career. Then I felt like an imposter. And then I thought maybe I'd have a couple glasses of red wine before I got here. Yes or no? That's what failure feels like. And so just to get up and hear these stories of, it was horrible, I failed, but look at me now. That's gold plating grit. That's being dishonest about what these things feel like. So let's talk about what they do feel like. The reckoning. The first thing men and women have in common who own these stories and are braver for it is they recognize emotion. They recognize when they're snared by emotion. When something difficult happens, our brain is wired to scramble for a story to help it make sense of what's happening. So I'm gonna pick on somebody. What is your name? Chris. Chris and I walk out of a meeting. And I look at Chris and say, great meeting, Chris. And he goes, ugh. What would your reaction be if he did that to you? It's gonna snare you, right? It's gonna do something. You gotta recognize that you've been grabbed by emotion. Because the first thing that happens when we're grabbed by our emotion is our brain scrambles to make up a story to explain what happened. So he does that, and I know, I always knew he didn't like me. I had a feeling this doesn't surprise me at all. In fact, this has been coming, I think, for a while. Like, he doesn't like me, he doesn't like my ideas, he doesn't trust me in the meeting. I knew this about him all the time. Yeah, he's a total jerk. Yeah. You know what, we have a meeting tomorrow, he's pitching this new idea. We'll see what he thinks after tomorrow. Yeah. That took 10 seconds. How many of you have ever gotten in a conflict with someone at work and walked away with an entire narrative made up about what happened? Yes or no? Men and women who rise strong recognize when they're in emotion and get curious about it. They don't walk into their office and say, damn, Chris, I'll show you who's boss around here. They walk into their office and go, wow, what is going on with me? It's like my hands are shaking, I'm pissed off, I can't breathe, I want to forage for carbohydrates. Like, what is going on? They get curious about it. Here's the way the neurobiology of conflict works, or pain. The brain needs to understand what's happening in order to feel like it can survive. It has zero tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity. It recognizes the narrative pattern of story of beginning, middle, and end. How many of you have ever had a conflict happen, and then when you kind of thought you figured it out, you had that aha moment, that moment of like, oh yeah. Do you know that feeling? That's not a feeling. That's a chemical reward in the brain for giving the brain a story that helps it reduce ambiguity and uncertainty. Here's the catch. The brain rewards us regardless of the accuracy of the story. It just wants certainty. So the first thing is, know when you're emotionally snared. How many of you in here know when you're emotionally tagged by something? How do you know when you're emotionally tagged? Physical feeling. At least 70% of the participants said it's physiology that cue them in. Who else knows when you're snagged by emotion? How do you know? Say again? Out loud talking to yourself. Me too. Usually I'm plotting about how to make someone cry. Like, I'm really plotting what is the meanest, most horrible thing I can do to this person without getting caught. Because I'm a vulnerability researcher. I need to know you for like half an hour before I can make you cry. And I try not to use my skills that way, but yes. Who else knows? How do you know you're in emotion? Swearing. Not me. Swearing. Then you get curious about it. And here's the thing about curiosity. Curiosity is a total shit starter. How many of you were raised to get curious about your emotion and explore them? 3 people. How many of you were raised to suck it up, push through, and get stuff done? The other 12,000. Okay. Right, so we have to stop and take a beat and figure it out. You gotta pay attention. The next part, this is the reckoning, the rumble. What do you call a story that has limited, and this is so important in sales, what do you call a story that has limited data points filled in by belief, value, and fear? Marketing. No. But funny. What do you call a story with limited data points filled in by belief, fear? It's the definition of conspiracy. A conspiracy is a story where there are limited factual data points, and you fill in the rest with your own values and fears. Do you remember the bumper sticker from the 70s that said, shit happens? If you see that bumper sticker, that is not a conspiracy theorist driving that car. Because conspiracies have zero tolerance for ambiguity or uncertainty. So what are the data points with Chris? We got out of a meeting. I said, have a nice day. He shook his head, growled, and shrugged his shoulders. The rest I'm filling in. I'm filling in the rest. What is a confabulation? A confabulation is a lie told honestly. So what is your name? Monty? Martin. Martin from the UK? From Sweden, Martin. So what would happen if I got back to my desk and I called Martin and said, oh my God, Martin, you're not even gonna believe what Chris just did. Well, what did he do, Brene? We walked out of a meeting, I told him to have a nice day, and he almost flipped me off. Like, he totally just threw shade, shot me down, put me down, growled at me. Is that a lie? You're like, it's a confabulation. It's a lie told honestly. Still dangerous. So then Martin says to me, and this is how things get out of control in organizations. Martin says to me, that doesn't sound like Chris at all, Brene. I'm like, oh, well, I'm sure it doesn't to you. I'm sure Chris is your BFF, so why don't y'all go to the meeting tomorrow and y'all can pitch the idea? Why don't y'all just get married? Why don't you, like, now, do you see how this happens? So the point of the Rumble is to challenge the conspiracies and confabulations that we have in our head about our hurt. And do they matter? Oh God, they matter hugely. Because what happens is emotion is driving, but our behavior and our thoughts are not even riding shotgun. They're in the back seat. And now how I behave at work with Chris, with Martin, are all based on what I'm telling myself about my hurt. Because here's the bottom line. We are better at hurting people than we are at feeling hurt. We are better at inflicting pain on people than we are at feeling pain. So the biggest step in the Rumble is the next step. Anne Lamott is a writer. She's amazing. And she has a book called Bird by Bird. And in Bird by Bird, she gives advice to young writers. And she says, every great writer starts with a shitty first draft. I call it the SFD. SFD short for stormy first draft or shitty first draft, depending on who you're talking to. 75% of the men and women I interviewed who got back up from falls successfully and stronger were completely aware of the first story they made up when something hard happened. And they wrote it down. So on a Post-it note, on your phone, first story, Chris doesn't like me, he doesn't trust me, he doesn't believe I know what I'm doing, he's a complete jerk, and he and Martin are both out to get me. It seems ridiculous, right? How many of you make up stories like this all the time? Every day. Here's what's important about that story, that SFD. Inside that SFD is everything you need to know to make yourself a braver person, to make yourself more self-aware. So the whole goal of Rising Strong is understand that you're in emotion, get curious about what it is, and capture the shitty first draft. Because when you capture it, you can ask yourself these 3 questions. What's true about this? What do I need to know more about myself, about Chris, and about our relationship? If you can answer those, you can change everything. Because let me tell you what I would do now. If that happened, I would probably go to my office and text myself an SFD. And you know that it's honest and real if you'd be mortified if someone found it. Because mostly they sound like 5-year-old temper tantrums. It is, because that's what the brain wants. Brain wants the conspiracy. Brain wants bad guy, good guy, unsafe, safe, nice, mean. That's what the brain wants. The brain wants certainty. So now what I would do is if I looked at that SFD, I would knock on Chris's door. So Chris, let's say I knock on your door. And I say, hey, do you have a second? Sure. We were walking out of the meeting earlier this afternoon. I said, have a nice day. And you kind of looked at me and rolled your eyes and snarled or something. And I'm making up that you're pissed off about something that happened in the meeting. Is there anything we need to clean up?
No, I'm just an unpleasant person.
No, I'm just an unpleasant person in general. So you might hear that, but this is a true story of something that happened to me with a colleague earlier this year. Except I waited 3 days, and I came this close to firing that person, which is really, really painful to think about, because what an act of hideous leadership on my part. So when I finally did circle back and ask, do you know what the answer was? Say again? He didn't have Wi-Fi. Close. He told his kids that he was going to be in a meeting from 10 to noon and to try not to blow up his phone while he was in the meeting. And his phone got totally blown up by his kids in the meeting. Like there were literally 13 texts from 3 kids. So when we walked out and I said, that was a great meeting, have a good day. And he was like, oh, it had nothing to do with me at all. And let me tell you, I'm a pretty self-confident person. Last night I was on Twitter, and someone sent a tweet out that said, "Why is BreneBrown at Inbound?" I was like, what? I came this close to tweeting back to that person and saying, "Nice warm welcome." Like, it went on from there. And then I was really, because I was on a flight, I was like, God, 13,000 people. Oh my God. And then it came up again. Why is BreneBrown? I'm like, guy is nothing if not persistent. And then I realized, along with a Twitter picture, there was a link to an article about the importance of vulnerability in marketing and my TED Talk. But do you see how fast that can happen? And I know you're laughing with me and not at me, because this is how we're wired. So the revolution comes when this rising strong process of recognizing emotion, getting clear on that first story, and challenging that story, when that process becomes a practice in our daily lives. That's what the revolution is. It changes you. The sentence, the stories I'm telling myself or what I'm making up right now has changed everything about the way we work. 6 months ago, we're in a meeting. It's a 3-hour meeting. It's hellacious. There's like 3 things left on the agenda. And I look at my team, my leadership team, and I'm like, I'm pulling this agenda item off. We've got to finish on time. People have things to do. I've got to catch a plane. Here's what we're doing. And then we just go on with our meeting. 10 minutes later, my CFO said, I got to stop us. And I'm like, what's up? And he said, the story I'm telling myself about moving that agenda item is that this is not a priority for you anymore. And that's okay if it's not, but I'm spending 90% of my time and resources on this project. So if it's not a priority anymore, if it's not important to the business anymore, I need to know about it. And I was like, man, thank you for being brave. It is still the top priority of this business, but I'm not going to cram it into 30 minutes. It needs its own meeting, its own time. He's like, thanks for cleaning it up, thanks. How many of you, show of hands, would have more respect for someone who came up to you and said, can I circle back with you on this? Here's what I'm making up about what's happening. Yeah, that's courageous. It's not easy because it's vulnerable to say, look, here's what I'm telling myself about what's happening, or the story I'm making up, or dude, when you made that comment, here's what that was for me. What's going on? It can change the way we live and work, because it's honest and it's vulnerable, and instead of responding to pain, we're feeling our way into it and feeling our way back up. Here's what I'm going to tell you about vulnerability. Let me share the story with you. I'm in LA, and this young guy walks up to me and says, do you have a second? And I said, yeah. He's probably 21. And he said, my parents sent me your TED Talks, and I watched them, and they changed my life. And I said, thank you. That means a lot to me. And he said, yeah, in fact, they inspired me to tell the girl that I've been dating for 6 months that I love her. I was like, oh, good God. I was like, great. And he said, yeah, I took her to our favorite restaurant. We were halfway through dinner, and I looked across the table at her, and I said, I love you. And she looked back at me, and she put her head down, and she said, I think you're awesome. And I think we should date other people. So he said he got in his car, and he drove home. And by now, there's like 10 people staying around us. And he said, the whole way home, I just kept saying over and over in my head, fuck BreneBrown, BreneBrown. I was like, worst story ever. And he said, I got home, and I opened the door to my apartment, and both my roommates were on the couch on their laptops. And they both looked up and like, dude, what's wrong with you? And he's like, I told her I loved her, and she totally blew me off. And he said, one of his roommates looked over and said, dude, that was completely lame. Girls only like you when you're running the other direction. And he said, oh, God, that's true. You're right. And he said, I thought about it for a minute, And I looked back at him and I said, no, man, that's not who I'm gonna be. I was daring greatly. And he said, both of my roommates burst into tears and were like, right on, man, right on. There's no question that being vulnerable feels terrifying and dangerous, and sometimes like a very bad idea. But I guarantee you what's more dangerous and more terrifying, because I've interviewed these people too, is getting to the end of our lives and having to look back and ask, what if I would have shown up? What if I would have said yes? What if I would have said I love you first? What if I would have tried that thing? That to me is a far more dangerous proposition than showing up and being seen. There are 1,000 cheap seats in the arena today, people who will criticize and judge and hurl mean-spirited things, who will never set foot in the arena once in their lives. And you gotta minimize that feedback because it's hurtful and it's effective. So you gotta get clear on whose opinions of you matter. But when you do that, I think your willingness to show up and be seen, your willingness to be uncomfortable in your life is the best predictor of how wholehearted your life will be. So thank y'all very much. I really appreciate it. Thank y'all. Have a great conference. Thank y'all. Am I going the right way? Thank you.